Hey there everybody, Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to our inaugural edition of our new questions and answers show. This is basically going to be a forum for you guys to ask me questions about all sorts of things music related or what have you, and me to pick out a bunch of the questions and sit here and answer them, right? It's probably the closest we're going to get to a live kind of chat thing. Today we're looking at a bunch of questions that you guys have submitted over the last week. And, oh, by the way, today is the 3rd of November. Didn't want to forget that. So how the format's going to work is every week when I do one of these shows, in the comments and feedback section of the actual show, list a bunch of questions you have for me. I will then pick a bunch of them and answer in the following week's show. So we're going to try and do these weekly. We'll see how it goes. I want to thank a lot of you guys for coming up with some great questions. There were a ton of them. I'm going to try and get to as many as I can, but obviously I can't get to all of them, for time restrictions and what have you. But let's jump right in. I'm going to mention all of the YouTube names of people who have actually, submitted these questions. So I'll do my best to pronounce some of them. So again, thanks everybody. Let's kind of get started here. So the first question is from Steve Syme. He asks, how many albums do you have in your collection? That's a great question. The exact count, I don't know. I haven't actually counted my CD collection in quite a long time, but my guess is somewhere in the neighborhood of 8,000 plus. So it's pretty substantial. Keeps growing. I purge stuff every so often, but I probably buy way more than I purge. So anyway, roughly 8,000 something CDs. And again, it's mostly CDs. I do have some LPs left, but not a lot. I had a very extensive LP collection back in the day, and I wound up, stupidly selling them at a yard sale, like maybe 20 years ago or something like that. But I have like maybe a dozen or so left. And I've been collecting CDs since the early 90s, and I just have so many of them to go switch back to LP at this point. Just doesn't make a lot of sense. So thanks, Steve, for your question. We're going to move to our friend WB over out of Poland. He's got a couple questions here. I'm going to try and tackle them all. His first question is, tell something about your stereo tower in your room and why you may or may not have high-end equipment. So basically, and I've been asked that a few times, so I don't actually have really, really top-of-the-line audio equipment. I kind of downsized a bunch of years ago. I have like an assortment of portable like CD players all throughout the house. I do have a home theater system which consists of a really nice Sony sound bar with subwoofer and a Sony Blu-ray player that really, really sounds great. So when I want to just kind of kick back and really crank some music and really hear the music really, really well, that's what I do. I also have a really good speaker system in my Toyota 4Runner, so I do listen to a lot of music on CD in the car. But I've got, like I said, I've got portable CD players here in my office. I've got them in the kitchen, all over the place. So usually wherever I am, I have a way to listen to music. I also have two 160 gig iPods. Yes, I still have iPods that I listen to mainly at the gym or when I'm traveling on an airplane or a train or something like that. So not a lot of really expensive high-end audio equipment, but I'm pretty happy with what I have. I think if I had a little more time to just sit and just listen to music, I'd probably invest in something. But because I have a pretty busy day job, I've got this, I got a lot of other hobbies and things, I don't have a lot of time to just sit and listen to music. So I'm usually listening to music while I'm doing other things, or like if I'm working out or if I'm traveling. So I try to adapt. Basically, what I have is works for my life and my lifestyle. So that's that. Here's WB's other questions here. You have shown both old and newer editions of CDs. He used Camel and Black Sabbath as an example. Why is that? Do the older versions sound bad, or do you prefer either or? It really kind of depends. I've been collecting CDs since they pretty much first came out. And as you know, a lot of our favorite bands, they've had reissue after reissue, remaster after remaster, deluxe edition after deluxe edition. So I found, I'll use some examples, like Black Sabbath is one, Yes, Rush, Jethro Tull, Gentle Giant. They've had multiple reissue and remaster series over the years. Some sound better than others. Some of the initial CD pressings of a lot of some of these classic albums were kind of muddy and flat sounding. Some of them they've really improved on over the years. Like for Camel, for instance, which WB asked about, I have a lot of the original CD pressings I'm a Camel fan. I wouldn't say I'm a huge fan, so I really have not gone and like sought out remasters or reissues that they've had. You know, Black Sabbath, I bought that catalog a couple times already, and I'll be frank, I thought some of those initial Warner Brothers CD pressings for the Black Sabbath catalog were not great sounding. So I think the remasters that they put out a couple years ago were pretty damn good, I thought. Some of the Kansas remasters were really good. I think they've done a great job on the Jethro Tull. So it's all a matter of if I like the band enough to buy CD reissues over and over again for increased sound quality. Sometimes you listen to these and they don't sound a hell of a lot better. You know, the Zeppelin remasters, I actually really like the recent ones. So it all depends. So I just kind of, it depends on how much I love the band. That's when I'll go seek out like newer editions. But I will say that some of the early CD issues from a lot of bands, they didn't sound really all that great. Not much of an improvement over the actual vinyl, the LPs. So, but they all differ. Another question from WB. Does my husky Tala prefer Ozzy or Dio era of Black Sabbath? I probably need to ask her, but I have a feeling she likes the Ozzy era better. It's just my guess. Do I have any Japanese editions of any CDs? Yes, I do. Specifically like jazz and jazz fusion stuff. I do have a lot of Japanese issues. I do have some Japanese CDs of more rock and metal and prog stuff. Kind of varies. I wouldn't say I have a ton, but I probably easily have 50 to 100 Japanese edition CDs. Like I said, especially jazz and jazz fusion and some prog stuff. Another question. How many CDs do you listen to on average a day? Probably 5 to 10. Depends on the day. I work from home, so I sit at this desk over here all day long, and I generally just play CDs in the background all day long. I usually play a CD or two while I'm cooking dinner. I always play a CD while I'm at the gym. So 5 to 10 on a really good day, probably more than 10, maybe a dozen, but I would say 5 to 10 is a good average. What else we got here? Tell me something about your private life, your family, what you like doing in your free time. All right, so I am married. I have 2 stepchildren who are both grown. We have a grandson. My stepson actually just got married. I think you guys heard me mention that recently. He got married 2 weeks ago. And I have obviously a daughter-in-law now. Got 3 dogs, 2 huskies, 1 Great Pyrenees German Shepherd mix. Love them to death. We live in the Hudson Valley, New York. I actually born and raised in New York State. Grew up in Brooklyn, New York. Well, actually born in Brooklyn, New York. Grew up in Goshen, New York. Been living here in Newburgh in the Hudson Valley for the last going on 10 years. And I work for a company called O'Reilly Media out of Sebastopol, California. I am a senior customer success manager by day. That's what I do. I've been managing the Sea of Tranquility webzine since 2001. Prior to that, we were actually a print magazine for a couple of years, and I was one of the staff writers. So I took over Sea of Tranquility in 2001, where we became a website, strictly a website. And you know, I've been managing our cast of writers who are all over the world, running this Sea of Tranquility YouTube channel. I also run the Comic Book Geezers YouTube channel. So I'm a pretty busy guy. But what do I like doing in my free time? I love cooking. I love swimming. We got a pool here. Love craft beer. Love going to local breweries. Love working out. I go to the gym every day. I play guitar. We'll get into that a little bit later. I got a few guitars. Been playing guitar most of my life. Not professionally, but it's just a hobby. Love vintage classic horror movies and sci-fi and fantasy. I'm a big comic book guy. I love old classic comic books, that sort of thing. Tell us about your favorite films. Okay, like I just said, I love comic book films. I'm a big Marvel Comics guy, so I love the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I love classic horror stuff. Universal horror films, you know, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, Dracula, the Mummy, Creature from the Black Lagoon. Love that stuff. I love the old Hammer films from the 60s and 70s. I love the Italian horror stuff. I like a lot of classic slasher stuff like Halloween, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Nightmare on Elm Street, and all that kind of stuff from like the late 70s, early 80s. I love 70s Al Pacino and Robert De Niro films. I love old gangster films, that sort of thing. So that's kind of what I like there. Next question from Richard Filmer. Do you have any late 60s, early 70s South African rock albums? I'm thinking here of bands like Freedom's Children, Hawk, Suck, the Otis Way Good Blues Band, etc. I'd be interested to know. Actually, not really. I've heard a little bit of Freedom's Child. They're pretty good, but I would say I'm not familiar with any of those other bands. I'm going to have to check them out. Thanks for the recommendations. Next couple questions here are from AZDH85224. What is your favorite guitar gear? As far as like guitars, amps, pedals, etc. I'm a Gibson Les Paul guy. I've got 3 Les Pauls sitting behind you over here. I also have a Fender Strat and a Fender Telecaster, in addition to an Epiphone 58 Carina Flying V replica, obviously. Pedals, or let's go to amps first. I have a Marshall DSL 15C because I'm kind of like a home player. I don't really have any big amps. I don't really have a use for them, but I do have a Marshall DSL 15C, which I love to death. I've got an Orange Crush 20, which I dig also. That's kind of like a little portable thing. I like to bring that around the house if I want to play in other rooms or take it out poolside type of thing. I also have a Fender Blues Junior that I got not too long ago. I dig that quite a bit. As far as pedals, I'm a big wah-wah guy. I got a Crybaby wah-wah over here. I have an Ibanez Tube Scream, which I love. I've got a Fuzz Face MXR Univibe. I've got a MXR Phase 90, that's the Eddie Van Halen thing. I've got a MXR carbon copy analog delay. I've got a DoD envelope filter. That's kind of the extent of what I have now. I've had all sorts of stuff throughout my playing career, playing life, whatever you want to call it. Sometimes I get rid of stuff, get new stuff. Right now, I'm pretty happy with that pedal board thing I got there. What are your top 5 rock CDs? Man, that is a tough question. Well, Deep Purple in Rock, Whitesnake 1987, Black Sabbath Volume 4, Kiss Alive, probably Rainbow Rising. That list might change from time to time, but that's probably my 5 top favorite albums of all time, or thereabouts. Top 5 jazz CDs, that's a tough one. Miles Davis, Tribute to Jack Johnson, Mahavishnu Orchestra, Intermounting Flame, Al Di Meola, Elegant Gypsy, Return to Forever, Where Have I Known You Before. Probably Tony Williams' Lifetime, Believe It. Again, it's mostly fusion-y type stuff. I like a lot of classic jazz too. I could name a crap load of Miles Davis albums who I love, or John Coltrane and stuff. I dig a lot of jazz, both classic jazz and fusion, and even some of the more 80s and 90s smooth jazz stuff. Like I love Spyro Gyra and the Rippingtons big time. So, that list may change from time to time. Top 5 concerts you have attended in your life. Man, where do we start? I jotted down a few here that really noteworthy, but there's been so many great ones. Rainbow and the Scorpions at Madison Square Garden, 1972. That was probably, for me, I was only 16 years old at the time. That was probably my first, mind-blown show. It was just so great. It was really my first exposure to the Scorpions. But I had liked Rainbow for a couple of years, and I was a big Deep Purple fan, so I loved Blackmore, and that was just an incredible double bill. A recent one, King Crimson at the Egg in Albany, New York, 2017. Mind-blowing. I've seen King Crimson a number of times. That was easily the best, and just an absolutely incredible show. Yes, at Madison Square Garden, 1991 on the Union Tour. Seeing all the Yes members up there together was an amazing, amazing thing. I actually caught them 4 times on that tour. That was just so good. Dream Theater at the Roseland Ballroom, 1999. That was the Scenes from a Memory tour. I was there with a handful of friends. We got pretty loaded before the show, and the show was packed in there, and it was just so intense. They played the whole album plus a bunch of favorites, and it was just an incredible, incredible show. Probably, for me, Dream Theater's finest hour, just as far as and I've seen Dream Theater more than any other band live, well over 20 times, and that was pretty damn special. They actually came back again to the same venue and recorded that DVD concert that most of you have probably seen. Black Sabbath at the Meadowlands 1982 Mob Rules tour with Ronnie James Dio. Pretty damn incredible. The poor Johnny Van Zant band opened up that show and played 25 minutes, got booed off the stage. I felt bad for them, but man, that was a just great concert. Sabbath at the height of their game with Ronnie, just incredible stuff. I'd also like to throw in here too. I went to, I think 7 or 8 or 9, I forget how many of the Nearfest festivals in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, as well as Trenton, New Jersey. And I would say quite a few of them were just so memorable. I could spend, maybe I'll do that someday. Maybe I'll do like a Nearfest Memories show where I talk about a lot of the Nearfests that I attended and some of the great bands that played and my experiences there, because that probably would be worthwhile for somebody to hear. But I saw some really, really good Nearfest shows over the years. All right, next viewer. James Rudd, what do you think of the first 3 Journey albums from 75 to 77 before Steve Perry joined? Love them. They're great. Very different. Journey, Look Into the Future, and Next. Really good albums, mostly Greg Raleigh on vocals. And I think they basically took that style they were doing with Santana, but a little bit less of the Latin influence and more like that kind of San Francisco, hard rock sound with plenty of prog and fusion thrown in there. Really good stuff. Very underrated, I think. I every now and then like to put those albums on and just really hear how different Journey was early on. And I loved Journey all throughout their career, but man, those 3 were pretty special, and I know prog fans love that stuff. Eric Ornella, do you have a problem with bands that go commercial, so to speak, specifically when a band starts out playing a certain way that definitely attracts fans, but maybe not as many fans as the record label or some of the band members want? So they change their music in order to be more popular, sell more merchandise, and or make as much money as possible. Obvious examples are Journey, REO Speedwagon, Chicago, Jefferson Starship, and Genesis, although I'm sure you can think of many others. Do you feel like these bands cheapen their music and integrity by selling out, or even through a lot more people are into them? I throw Rush as well as Yes into that kind of category as well. And maybe, in terms of both Rush and Yes, maybe not specifically they're just trying to sell more records or what have you. I just think that they were changing with the times. And I think, in some of these instances, Chicago, for instance, it's been well documented that Chicago wanted to reach more people. They wanted to, because they were stagnating a little bit in the late 70s. They hooked up with David Foster. They wanted to go for the masses. Journey, I think that's just kind of the direction they moved in. Steve Perry made them more commercial. Obviously, he had a very accessible vocal style. Jefferson Starship, yeah, I think they wanted to sell records. Genesis, I think that was kind of Phil Collins, but I think they got that kind of first big taste of success with Duke, and they wanted to take that to the next level. So, I don't really necessarily have a problem with it if bands want to expose their sound to more people by making their music a little more accessible. So many, Metallica did that too, for crying out loud. I think so many acts have done that over the years. It's just a matter if us longtime fans want to continue listening, right, and want to buy into that shift in musical style. So I don't knock them for doing it. I don't necessarily have to keep following along, but part of me, if I really like the band, I try to adapt to the new style as long as I possibly can. In a lot of instances it works. In a lot of these, examples we gave here, it worked. REO got really, really poppy after the High Infidelity album. But that High Infidelity album, even though it had the big, huge hit, Keep On Loving You, there's really good stuff on that album. Journey, I pretty much like everything Journey has done. Chicago got really sappy for my money. Starship 2, Genesis, I really couldn't listen to after like Duke, Abacat. I was kind of done with that. But Rush kind of lost me a little bit with Power Windows and Hold Your Fire. But I think for the most part, I kept with them the whole time. Yes, too. 90125 is a really good album. Big Generator, it's okay. So, but they've, and the problem with Yes is that I think that in recent years, the last like 20 years at least, their studio output's been pretty tame, I think. But I don't think they necessarily want to, go more commercial or reach more people. I think they're trying to recapture their old sound and they just haven't been able to. So, I don't know. Steve Jones, you got a good question here. It'd be interesting to know what you think of bands like Nightwish. I actually like Nightwish quite a bit, and I've been listening to Nightwish for a long time. I will admit, though, I like, they've had 3 singers. So you've had Tarja in the beginning. Then you had, what was her name? Annette Olsen. And then in recent years, Flora Jansen, who came over from, after Forever, and a couple other acts. I personally like even though I think the songwriting was probably the best, I like the Tarja era the least because I find her vocal style just a bit too operatic, and it just grates on me a little bit. She's a lovely person, beautiful woman, and she's very majestic in everything she does. But I prefer to listen to the Floor Jansen stuff, the newer material, and I like the album with Annette quite a bit as well. Or did she do 2 albums? I forget now. Yeah, I like Nightwish, and I think that they basically. Other bands did that style, obviously, but I think that Nightwish kind of like really paved the way for these symphonic metal bands, and now you've got so many of them. But I think for the most part, most of the metal community really gives Nightwish their due. I think they're a fairly big band now. They're maybe not mainstream. You're not going to walk down the street and ask 10 people if you heard Nightwish. I'm sure most of them will say no, but I think most people who are into metal and heavy music probably know who Nightwish is, and I think they've gotten their just rewards, I think, which is really good to see. So yeah, I'm a fan. Next question from Raymond Kaiser. Do you believe rap and hip-hop should be considered for induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? There seems to be a lot of argument about this. Personally, I think they should have their own Hall of Fame like country western does. Yeah, I absolutely agree. You're not going to get an argument from me there. I'm sorry. I mean, I know that the origins of rock music comes from rhythm and blues and blues, but, rock and roll is rock and roll, right? And I don't think rap bands belong in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Sorry, that's just me. I don't believe country bands belong in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame either. And you know what? Maybe there just needs to be a hard rock and metal Hall of Fame and a prog rock Hall of Fame, whatever. But and I know a lot of you have said to me over the past couple months that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is basically bullshit anyway, and I kind of agree with you. But we have it. I'd like it to, do the right thing in most of these instances, but they usually don't. So. Next question from Arnaud B. What is your favorite Canterbury record? Great question. I would probably say Soft Machine's 3rd album. Close second, National Health of Cues and Cures. I like both those bands quite a bit. Hatfield and the North's first is great, but I think Soft Machine's 3rd album that's a damn great album. And, you could argue that that's, I know they come from that Canterbury area. That's just as much a jazz fusion album as it is anything else, as is the National Health album, which is probably why I like them both so much. Do you like and listen to classical music? You know what? I like classical music. I honestly don't own any. I don't seek it out. When I hear it, I like it. What is your favorite keyboard player, prog or fusion? Man, that is a tough one. How about I list a couple? It'd be kind of hard to pick a favorite around the spot. Keith Emerson, Rick Wakeman, obvious choices. John Lord, I love John Lord. Tony Banks, love him. Kerry Minier from Gentle Giant. Of more recent guys, I love Eric Norlander. Plus, he's a good friend that I've known for a while. Great guy and great player. I love Neal Morse's playing. I think he's spectacular. On the jazz fusion side, I'm a massive Chick Corea fan. I love Jan Hammer. I love Herbie Hancock. Joe Zawinul, man, there's so many good ones. So, yeah, but I'd pick a favorite keyboard player? Man, I don't know. It'd be tough. Maybe Emerson? John Lord? I don't know. Tough question. Good question. Have to think about that some more. Jason R. has a couple questions. If you played music professionally, which one of your favorite artists or band could you see yourself playing with? Pretty easy question. That'd probably Black Sabbath. When I play, I'm a kind of riffy type of guy. I like that kind of old 70s, hard rock and proto-metal type stuff. I would love to play with Black Sabbath. I think that would be like a dream come true. Second question, what do you think of Tinsley Ellis? I'm actually not very, very familiar with him. I have listened to some of his stuff. He's a pretty damn good blues player. I probably should listen to more of him and get some of this stuff. I don't own any Tinsley Ellis CDs. But I have, checked him out on YouTube from time to time, and he's pretty damn good. Very emotional player. I like his style a lot. Next question from John Hodgson. Oh, this is a great one. I am an atheist, but regarding self-confessed Christian Neal Morse as one of the most important figures in prog rock of recent times. I think his recent Similitude of a Dream concept album to be one of the best prog concept albums since The Lamb. My question to you is, can you, like me, enjoy Neal Morse's music despite the questionable lyrical subject matter? That is a fantastic question, John. And I will admit that's something I've struggled with because I was born and raised a Catholic. I am not really a practicing religious person much at all. I haven't been for, a good chunk of my life, but, born and raised a Catholic. And I always loved Spock's beard, and when Neal left and he started up his solo career, I will admit to being a little turned off by what I perceive to be very preachy lyrical content of a lot of Neal's first few solo albums. I found it to be a bit much, and I had a hard time with it because I love Neal Morse. I love his vocal style. I love the way he writes melodies. I think he's a great keyboard player. Just, he's one of my favorite like prog musicians of the last 25 years or so. It wasn't until he released, and I forget which exactly, he released a series of live albums where he played like his studio albums in full at was it the Morse Fest or something. So I'm thinking probably like maybe 4 years ago or something like that, the first one. And I remember getting that in for review, and I watched it, and I literally just put it on. I sat in the living room on the home theater system and had a couple beers, and man, I finally came to realize that, what, this music is really great. The melodies are great. The messaging is very positive, and I kind of forced myself to look past the very Christian lyrics and just really appreciate the songs and the albums for what they are. So I've been able to reconsider and reapproach the Neal Morse solo catalog since then, and I've been able to get past the really, because that's some pretty heavy lyrics, right? If you're not into the whole Christian thing. And I will say, I think the stuff that he's written, that he's used with the Neal Morse band, specifically The Similitude of a Dream, it's still kind of Christian-y, right? But it's not so heavy in that direction. And I think that it's been a little bit easier to take, obviously. But yeah, it's a great question, and I know I've talked to a lot of people who have had. It's like a barrier, right? It's like a little bit of a wall. It's like, I really want to like this. The music is great. It's everything I love about prog, but man, it's just so much, And he's dabbled a little bit in transatlantic too, but not overly. So I've learned to kind of get used to it and accept it for what it is, and I just it's positive stuff, which Neal's a very positive guy, and he's all about this. So great question, John. Metal 1111. Do you care about Kiss's End of the Road tour? Do I care about it enough to pay like $200 a ticket to go see them? Probably not. Is it sad that Kiss is retiring? Yeah, but they're probably one of those bands that probably need to just call it a day. I love Kiss. I've loved them since I was a kid. I saw them 3 years ago. They were great, and I think that's the memory that I want to have in my mind as they kind of move on to the next phase of their lives, because I've seen enough videos on YouTube in recent months of shows they've done all over the world recently, and Paul just can't sing anymore. I mean, it's bad. And would it be cool to go see them play one last time, doing all the classic songs, and maybe having Ace show up, or Peter, or Vinnie Vincent, or whatever? Although I don't know if I really want to see Vinnie Vincent at this point. But so yeah, I care enough that it's sad that they're retiring, because they're one of my favorite bands of all time. But I don't think I care enough to spend big bucks to go see them and sit up in the nosebleed seats, that type of thing. So like I said, I think I saw them 3 years ago. I have good memories of that show. I think I want to leave it at that. Another question from Metal 11. Which Michael Schenker replacement in UFO do you prefer? I like Vinnie Moore better as a player, but I think the Paul Chapman era stuff is a little stronger. Okay, so I know that's kind of a dick answer there, but player Vinnie Moore, but Paul Chapman, when he was in the band in the early to mid 80s, I think that era of the band created better music, obviously. I'm not discounting the Vinnie Moore era stuff, because I like it quite a bit, but I think that those albums with Paul Chapman were better. The next question from All Media Reviews blogspot.com. What is your take on the new progressive rock bands that combine progressive rock with college/alternative/indie rock styles, like the Mars Volta, Dredge, Muse, Deer Hunter, Oceansize, Mew 3, etc.? I've heard a bunch of these bands. I don't dislike them. I'm not much of a alternative or indie rock guy. Never really have been. So I would say my exposure to a lot of these bands is probably a bit less than other types of bands. But I've listened to and enjoy the Pineapple Thief. I like Coheed and Cambria. I've liked Blackfield a bit. King Bathmat's another band, a fairly newer band that kind of combines those styles pretty good. Circa 5 is a new one that I've heard. They're pretty damn good. Big Big Train's decent. Fido's pretty good. So, I'm probably not the best guy to ask, but Deer Hunter I've liked the last couple albums. Muse, I kind of liked them initially. I kind of lost interest in them. Same thing with the Mars Volta. So indie rock was never really my thing. So, but I've liked what I've heard. Do I go and seek it out? Probably not. Paul Cadby, what are some of your favorite Australian rock bands, past and present? Well, of course, AC/DC, right? Love AC/DC. I happen to like Wolfmother quite a bit. Some of you may or may not remember the old 70s heavy band, proto-metal band called Buffalo. Dig them. If you never listened to them, go check it out. Volcanic rock, baby. Good stuff. Buffalo. Masters Apprentices. Love them. They had those couple albums, man, they released in like the mid-70s, which were great heavy prog rock albums. I kind of dig the Little River Band. They're fun. On the extreme side, I love Psychroptic, technical death metal band, and most especially Destroyer 666. Probably one of the best extreme / thrash bands going today. Great band. Good question. Next, our old buddy Jiff882. I saw your episode reviewing the 2016 Black Sabbath remasters. My question is, did you even own the black box? That was a 2004 box set of the first 8 Sabbath CDs. By the way, are you going to do an episode dedicated to the band Camel? First question first. No, I never owned the black box. With Black Sabbath, it's how many times can I keep buying all this stuff? So, I bought like multiple CD issues of the old Ozzy stuff, and I think the recent remasters are really good. I had the original issues of the Dio, those couple of albums with Dio, and then I went and bought the Dio box, right? I got that. And then I've had multiple issues of some of the 80s and 90s stuff. So, it just got to the point where how many times can you keep buying these things? So no, I never bought the black box. I know a lot of people compare the sound quality, the remastered versions in the black box to the more recent ones. And I can't compare them because I never heard the black box. Am I going to do an episode dedicated to the band Camel? Perhaps. I won't say that I'm the hugest Camel fan on the face of the earth. I do like them. I have, I think, pretty much all their catalog. I don't know if I'm knowledgeable enough on Camel. I could tackle it, but there might be better people out there to do it than me. But a great band. I do like them quite a lot. Next question from David M. How do you acquire all your music? Do you purchase them or do record labels send promos for your review? And what do you do for a living? Okay, well, I think I tackled the what do you do for a living thing before. I've been in sales for like over 25 years, and I've been doing customer success for the last couple of years, which is a kind of a new thing in the software industry. Whereas it's kind of part of sales, but not. It's more like what I do is I work with government clients, and basically when they purchase access to our product, I help them get trained up on it. I do a lot of product demos, and I make sure they get the most value out of the product that they purchased. And so it's pretty intensive work that I do with our customers. I'm kind of like a consultant to each client type of thing. So that's what I do for a living. So as far as stuff that I own, I would say, I do get sent a lot of things for review, obviously running a website like Sea of Tranquility for the last, 17 years. But I still buy a hell of a lot of stuff. So, and these days, really the labels send very little physical product. You get a lot of like, the bands who send stuff, they send their CDs, some of the smaller labels, excuse me. But in many instances, we get digital promos, okay? Download links to download stuff. And as you can see, I'm a physical music guy. I buy CDs. For me, streaming stuff on Spotify or downloading something, that's not owning music. That's not having music, because you know what? If the electricity goes out, if Spotify, craps out or whatever, or your hard drive goes kaplooey, you got shit, right? But I still got these. I can go jump in the car and listen to music or do whatever I want to do. So I still buy stuff. But as far as like what the labels send, so a lot of the labels that do send the digital streaming or download files, if they send me something and I review it and I really like it, I generally will go out and buy the CD. So I would say probably 80 to 90% of what what I own, I've purchased. Okay. The next question from our friend Bongalong. Desert Island, 3 albums. That's right, only 3 for your island. Go. That's pretty simple. Deep Purple in Rock, Black Sabbath Volume 4, Whitesnake 1987. It's that simple. Next question. Got a couple of them from MV Unit 3. Snobbery and progressive rock and metal fans. I raise my hand that I have had my moments, I guess. But also the progressive rock and hard rock, heavy metal fans that are stuck in the early days of progressive rock, and the very contentious view that prog metal is an abomination of sorts, and those stuck in metal of the 80s and 90s, though may not have ventured into the underground bands of the same era earlier. Okay, I think I know what you're getting at there. So, yeah, there's a lot of people that fall into this category. I try not to. I try to have an open mind towards, granted, most of the bands and albums that I really love come from the 70s and 80s. I mean, I basically, my main loves are 70s prog, 70s hard rock, heavy rock, and proto metal, that type of thing. 80s metal, 70s jazz fusion. But I also have a real love for like 90s and 2000s progressive rock and a lot of metal stuff as well. But there are a lot of people that I come into contact with who they're especially the progressive rock crowd. There's a lot of people who are like, if it's not from the 70s, it's not good, or if it doesn't sound like it came from the 70s, it's not good. If it doesn't feature Moog synthesizers or Hammond organs, it's not good. There's a lot of that going on, and I've recently come across, and I find this kind of crazy. A couple people who've viewed a couple of the videos that I've had up there, especially when I do like underground stuff, like the underground prog and the metal shows and hard rock shows that I've done. There are people who are like, who cares about the underground stuff? It was underground for a reason. Only the only bands that were good were the ones, the Zeppelin, Sabbath, Maiden, and they're like, no, that's absolutely not true. There are so many great bands that they never were lucky enough to get a record contract. Or maybe they had, they got signed to a label, they released one album, and then they were dropped, but they released independently a couple other albums after that are just floating out there that you can get. And some of that stuff is as good as any of the great bands that appeared on major labels and sold millions of copies. So, it's kind of a fine line. I guess it depends on what you like, what your opinions are. I try to be open-minded to everything. So... MV Unit 3's next question. What got you into progressive rock, metal, and the various subgenres that we at our age was invented in our timeline? This may be a video that needs a good amount of time to discuss. Maybe part 1 or 2 for both. Yeah, I mean, what got me into progressive rock? I think the first prog album, so we're going back into the late 70s for me. So Genesis Seconds Out, Yes Drama, those early ELO albums, those were probably my first forays into prog, okay? And then, Rush, obviously. I didn't really get into full-blown, and I listened to King Crimson and, trying to think what other bands, ELP and all that kind of stuff. I liked all those bands, but I don't think I didn't really jump into prog till the early 90s. And I'm talking heavy into prog. And what made me go that route is throughout the 80s, I was a huge hard rock and metal guy. So I didn't really have a lot of time for a lot of prog stuff. But it was as metal was kind of dying in the early 90s and alternative was taking over that I basically just said I need to find something else to listen to because, metal was kind of, there were a lot of other metal bands. In fact, there's a question coming up. We're going to get into that a little bit. There were a lot of other metal bands that came out in the 90s, but for me, metal kind of died in the 90s for a bunch of years, and I had to find other things to interest myself. So I really jumped into prog, both the classic stuff, I got into Tull and Marillion and all that kind of stuff, and then I got into Spock's Beard and Echolin and all that kind of thing. And then Dream Theater basically jump-started my love for progressive metal. And to go back to your first question about a lot of prog rock snobs hate progressive metal. I get that. They find, overindulgence and, they hate Dream Theater and Symphony X and all that kind of stuff. Whatever. Dream Theater owes as much to Yes and ELP as they do to Rush and Rainbow and, Fate's Warning even, and early Judas Priest. So it's all kind of relative. So that's kind of what got me into, metal. Kiss was the start. But I think the real band that just kind of threw me for a loop and changed my life forever was Black Sabbath. Once I listened to Paranoid for the first time, which I think was like 1978 or 79, that was it. That got me into, then I, got into Deep Purple and Rainbow and Led Zeppelin and, of course, Judas Priest and Iron Maiden and Scorpions, and then, forget it, went from there. So it was kind of like a little gradual process, but once it happened, there was no stopping it. Another question from MV Unit 3. I have seen lots of comments over the years that people believe you have to be a musician to enjoy or appreciate music that is complex, or in some cases more progressive, eclectic, or experimental. What are your thoughts? I personally think you don't have to, and most people I know are not musicians but have ears and mental faculties tuned differently than most. Yeah, I've seen both. I know plenty of people who can't appreciate bands like Yes or Dream Theater or Rush or the Allman Brothers or, Return to Forever Mahavishnu Orchestra if they don't play an instrument, or they can't appreciate like lengthy instrumental passage and stuff. There's a lot of people out there who like, verse, chorus, vocal music, and that they can remember, that they can sing to, that they can tap their feet to, play air guitar to, whatever. There's a lot of people like that. So I don't think you need to be a musician, because obviously I know a lot of non-musicians who appreciate that type of music, but there's a big chunk of the general public that will not accept that type of music because they just, oh my God, 5-minute long guitar solo, I can't deal with it. When is this song going to end, type of thing. So there's both. But no, you don't need to be a musician to be able to enjoy progressive rock, for instance. I know a lot of prog rock fans who don't play anything. So it all depends, right? It all depends. Next question from Retro. Do you think bands run out of steam after the first 3 or 4 albums? The early material of most bands always seems to be the best, and after about 4 albums it seems to tail off into adequacy. There must be a limit of how many songs that you have in you. Some bands, yes. I think there's a lot of bands where their first 3 or 4 are so good, and then it just kind of tails off a bit. There's exceptions, obviously, right? And there are some that don't really get going until their 3rd or 4th album. Yes is a perfect example. I think, Yes's first couple albums are good for what they are, but it wasn't until their 3rd and certainly 4th and 5th and 6th albums that they really took off. Rush is another good example too. Those first couple albums are great, but man, they continued being great for a long time after that. It's arguable, you could say there's a lot of people who, the Rush album up to Moving Pictures, probably their best material ever. And, you really can't knock that. But they kept getting, Hemispheres and Farewell to Kings and 2112, Permanent Waves, Moving Pictures. They just kept getting better and better. Led Zeppelin, too. Led Zeppelin released a lot of strong stuff after their first couple albums. The Stones also. I think the Stones' best albums were, after they released those first 4 or 5 and took off from there. They had that, really nice run. Elton John's another good example. Deep Purple, certainly. The first couple albums are cool for what they are, the psych albums, but till In Rock is when they really hit their stride. Sabbath, arguably, too. So, but, you can go throughout history and look at a lot of bands. Like Dream Theater is a good example. So there's a lot of people who say the first 3 or 4 Dream Theater is the best thing they ever did. First 3 or 4 Dream Theater albums, and then after that, after Scenes from a Memory, it started to kind of peter out for a bit. You could look at a lot of probably more recent acts where maybe that falls into the category. Like, look at those first bunch of Sabotage albums, right? A little bit of a drop-off after that. Metallica, perfect example. Yeah, maybe Megadeth to an example too, but I think Megadeth has had a late career resurgence. So it all depends. But yeah, I think most people kind of see that those early albums usually are the best. But it doesn't, there's a ton of exceptions. Next question from Count D'Angeli. Obviously, you tend to like music mostly from the 70s and 80s when rock probably peaked in terms of quality and popularity. What is your fair assessment of the state of rock metal today? I think rock is in a sad shape. Metal is better due to death, black, doom, sludge genres. Yeah, I would agree with you. I think that just general rock music for me has been pretty static and stale for a long time. You do get bands coming out, playing rock and roll that I think there's a lack of originality, obviously. Music has been done for any band to come up with something completely original nowadays is next to impossible. music has been hashed and rehashed for decades, for the last like 50 years. And that's why I don't mind a band like, Greta Van Fleet or Rival Sons or a lot of these like Swedish retro hard 70s bands coming out. I don't mind them because I know that I don't expect to be knocked over by a band doing a totally original style. So it doesn't happen that often at all. So, I don't mind when bands are kind of recycling old styles, old themes, old ideas, because what else is there to do? But I think in general, just rock and roll, straight rock bands, pretty stale these days. However, the metal scene is thriving still, even though the problem with metal is there's so many bands and so many of them are coming out that sound kind of the same. But there's still there's still some good black metal stuff coming out. There's still a lot of good death metal albums being released. A ton of great doom albums, to your point. So I think that progressive metal certainly. So I think that the metal scene is kind of thriving. Unfortunately, it's still kind of on the underground metal. But I think like straight rock and roll, there's really not much happening, obviously, other than handfuls of acts here and there. And that's why you see like so much of the charts, the hits and all that kind of stuff is littered with rap and hip hop and country and pop and, dance music because, and then they're not reinventing the wheel either. Let me tell you. So I think music in general is kind of a little stale, but there's just a lot of acts are just kind of recycling old ideas. And that's where we're at. All right. Got a breeze through here. Alan Joyce. All-time favorite album covers. Oh my God, I think I'm gonna have to do an episode on itself. In fact, I think I'm definitely gonna do that. My all-time favorite album covers. Let's see. I love the Who's Next album cover, Rainbow Rising. I'm a Roger Dean fan. So, yes, Tales from Topographic Oceans or Relayer. I love the Uriah Heep Abominog album. I love Monsters and Creatures, so I just always love that one. Brain Salad Surgery by ELP. The Boston debut. Led Zepp Houses of the Holy. Asia's first album. Again, Roger Dean. Rodney Matthews, I'm a big fan of a lot of the album covers he's done. I love the Magnum Chase the Dragon. Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. Sabbath debut. Black Sabbath's debut. That's a great album cover. So many good ones. I am going to do a favorite album cover show. That's a great question. Jamie Laszlo. How the hell do you do long videos all in one take without screwing up? Not very easily, Jamie. I have tried very hard to keep these like a live show, even though they're not streaming live or running live as I record them. I am not into doing like multiple takes and edits and all that kind of stuff because a lot of other guys do that. A lot of other shows do that. I like it to be a live show. So this is warts and all. So I'm going to occasionally mispronounce things. I may give you a wrong date on something. I may have a little coughing fit here and there, or my dog may come up behind me and, bark or whine or jump up on me or something like that. That's just me. This is the style I like to do. So yeah, almost all these, I would say 99% of all these videos I've done have been in one take. Usually the only time I stop and redo is if I screw up in the first like 30 seconds or whatever. But yeah, I've gotten used to doing it this way. I guess my broadcasting background kind of came to handy here. Jack Guastamachia, hope I'm saying that right. Hi Pete, you never talk about punk music or punk bands. Were you or are you not into the first wave of punk music from the mid-70s to the mid-80s? Honestly, Jack, I'm not much of a punk fan. Never was. I was always a metal guy. So I just never really adopted punk music much at all. I will say I do like the MC5 and the Stooges. So, and that's pretty early. I don't dislike the Ramones, but never much of a fan. So yeah, I'm not a big punk guy, but I love those two bands, and those are kind of like the godfathers of punk music. John Harden. Hey Pete, in terms of production quality, do you prefer the organic sound of, say, a Sabbath Volume 4 or the massively overproduced Sabbath 13, and why? Just want your opinion on engineering, production, and what you prefer. I mean, I like it all. I know a lot of people who make a really, really big deal about production qualities on albums. And I know a good amount of folks who they just can't get into and listen to recordings post like 1995 and just go on and on and on about how great the album sounded in the 70s and the 80s. And, I get that. But I don't really fall into either camp. I like releases from both. I like some of the old classic sounding analog stuff. I like a lot of the digital stuff. to me, it's like as long as the album doesn't sound like complete fucking mud, um, it's all about the songs for me. It's like, so I watch and I read and I talk to so many people who just go on and on and on, getting so granular about like, oh, the drums sound tinny and the guitar is so compressed and this is buried in it. It's on and on and on. And they never talk about, well, what about the fucking songs? To me, I listen to music, I listen to albums by bands because I'm judging them based on their songs. If the song is good, if the musicianship is good, if the vocals are good, if the music moves me, I look past the fact that it may not be a 100% perfect sounding production. So to answer your question, John, I don't mind either or. I personally love Sabbath 13, okay? And I love Volume 4. So I dig it all. I've got a spot in my heart for all these different types of sounding albums, and it's like, and I don't necessarily prefer one or the other. I mean, obviously the stuff that I love the most is from the 70s and the 80s, but I hear a lot of new, Christ, I love putting on like a progressive or power metal band and hearing that crisp, crunchy, overly compressed stuff. It just balls to the wall. I mean, I love it. So, and I love the more, spacious sounding stuff, the more organic stuff, the analog stuff from the 70s. So I don't really prefer either or, and to each his own, right? So next question from Sulkier Lou 1754. It's obvious you have extensive knowledge of British music and bands in the 70s. I would like to hear your thoughts on the sensational Alex Harvey band. To me, a very underrated band. Yeah, exactly. I like the sensational Alex Harvey band. I'm a big fan of Zal Clements, the guitar player. I especially love their live album from 1975, which I think is damn good. And if you've never listened to sensational Alex Harvey band, you should definitely pick that up. Quite good. John Cox, have you been to the UK to watch a gig? I have not. And if not, where and who would you like to see? I would love to see a band like Opeth at the Royal Albert Hall. And I would like to see Iron Maiden at the Hammersmith Odeon. How about that? I'm sure I could come up with a whole bunch more, but I think if I were to pick two places, two bands for the first time in London, that's what I would like to see. Dwill 123, Jimi Hendrix, The Experience versus the Band of Gypsies. Which was better? Which do you prefer? Man, that's probably like impossible to answer. You know what? I'm going to go The Experience by a nose, but man, I love the Band of Gypsies too. I just think The Experience, when that band was together, they put together better music, a little tighter of a band. I think the Band of Gypsies were a little looser, funkier. So I don't know. That's a hard question. I don't even know if I can answer that. I'm going to give the slight nod to The Experience, but that's a hard question. From Ben Morrison, what do you think of Banquet by Lucifer's Friend? Love it. Ben states it's his favorite album. I like it. I think that was Lucifer's Friend, real proggy album. There's bits of jazz fusion there as well. I really like it. One great thing about the Lucifer's Friend band is that almost every album sounded completely different. Their debut is great early proto-metal heavy rock, and then they did some hard rock stuff mixed with bits of prog. Banquet is just a great album. Again, really good tunes and a lot of different instrumentation on there. Excellent stuff. Good question. Wizardo Fox, who are your favorite music critics or writers and why? I don't follow a lot of contemporary stuff anymore because I'm doing so much on my own, but I will say I have a ton of respect for Martin Popoff from Brave Words and Bloody Knuckles. I've known Martin for a while. We communicate fairly regularly. I've read known a ton of his books. I like the stuff he's done with Brave Words. I just think he's got a really, really extensive knowledge of just about everything. He's also a pretty positive guy. I like writers who are positive and don't always concentrate on negative stuff. There's so many writers out there today that every review, everything they write about is just negative. I can't deal with that. Martin's very positive. He's got a lot of similar, likes and loves as I do, which is kind of cool. But and we're just about the same age. But what I like about Martin is when he talks about bands and artists and albums, he talks about the songs, he talks about the music. And that's always how I felt. So I kind of have a kinship with Martin because I really appreciate that. If I'm going to read one of Martin's books on a band, he talks about the albums and all the songs. He talks about the music. That's what it's all about. So I really appreciate what Martin has done. I always have. Next question from Scott McGregor. Everybody gives their opinions on guitarists, best lead, coolest riffs, etc. Like James Brown said, give the drummer some. For that matter, how about keyboard players and the ones that get the least love, bass players? I would love to see a show on your favorite instrumentalists. All right, so let's talk about bass players for right now. Some of my favorite bass players of all time. Geddy Lee, Chris Squire, Jaco Pastorius, Jeff Berlin, Billy Sheehan, love Billy Sheehan, Stanley Clarke, Tony Levin, Paul McCartney, John Entwistle. All legends. Love them to death. There's some amazing bass players out there. And I agree, they need to get more coverage. Maybe I'll do a show just all on bass players. Lawrence Terwilliger. Are CDs the only audio format that you listen to? There's been such a resurgence to vinyl cassette lately. I'd like to hear your comments about the different audio formats. Yeah, basically CDs are what I have, as you can see. I have too many to go back and start doing other things. And I have no problems with CDs at all. I like the format. I always have. LPs are great, though. Cassettes, I had a shitload of cassettes back in the day. I eventually got rid of all of them. I replaced most of them on CD when CDs became popular. So I never really liked the quality of cassettes at all. But yeah, you can't go wrong with a good vinyl if you got a nice record player. I know a lot of people have gone out and bought new record players and started collecting vinyl again. I haven't, just because I got so much invested in this, as you can see. So I haven't gone there. I know my wife would kill me, and my CD's taking up enough room in this house. So I'm not going to go there. Manic Scarecrow, do you think there were any bands better than the Beatles? Well, I mean, that's all opinion, right? Beatles were a great band, not one of my favorites. I've always liked them. I would even say I love a lot of the Beatles stuff. You know, who were the greatest band of all time? I don't know. The Beatles, the Stones, Led Zeppelin? Yeah, arguably those might be the three greatest, rock and roll bands ever. I don't know. So it's hard for me to say. I like a lot of bands better than the Beatles. For me, if you were going to ask me my personal opinion, I think, Purple and Sabbath were better than the Beatles, but that might be blasphemy to a lot of people. So the best and most famous, pure rock and roll bands, yeah, the Beatles are up there. Beatles, Stones, and Zeppelin, I think, probably are arguably the greatest rock and roll bands of all time. Question from Tree Duck. Rate your top 10 Judas Priest albums. A fantastic question, which I'm sure I'm going to get into when we finally do that History of Judas Priest show. So let's do it. Stained Class. Sin After Sin. This is in order, by the way, from 1 to 10. Sad Wings of Destiny. Hellbent for Leather. Screaming for Vengeance. Defenders of the Faith. Painkiller. Firepower. Redeemer of Souls. And Rock-a-Rolla. There you have it. Paul B. What would your favorite live DVD release be? I've got so many good. You know what? I try not to overthink this one too much, and I went to the one that I probably watched the most, and I can pop in any time and just love it just as much as the first time I've seen it. Jimi Hendrix live at Woodstock. Love it to death. Love it to death. Leaf Seklasi. I hear a lot about hard rock in the 80s. 1991 was a turning point for hard rock and heavy metal. From your perspective, what were the significant bands putting out worthy releases during the seismic shift that was the 90s? Yeah, that was a tough decade for me because I was a big metalhead all throughout the 80s, and then the 90s came, and a lot of metal bands kind of went away, or they tried to do what the Seattle bands were doing, didn't really work, and I got really disenchanted. But there were a lot of great bands in the 90s that were still really making it work. Dream Theater did a lot for progressive rock and metal in the 90s. Pantera certainly did a lot for metal, but it got a lot of the extreme bands were really just boiling in the underground in the 90s. Death, Cannibal Corpse, Morbid Angel. For me, of the Seattle bands, I thought Alice in Chains were absolutely fantastic. I like Soundgarden too. Not to knock Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Stone Temple Pilots and all that, but just not for me. But Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, yep. Spock's on the prog side, Spock's Beard, the Flower Kings, Glass Hammer, Angleguard, Ekelin. These bands all came up and thrived in the 90s. Tool, another great band from the 90s. Radiohead, regardless of what I think of Radiohead, I mean, their impact in the 90s was fantastic. Kind of this like indie band mixing, bits of electronica and progressive rock. System of a Down, Faith No More, Fate's Warning, Extreme. So, a lot of really good stuff happening in the 90s. But again, it was just different. A lot of changing things happening in the music industry. Tate Davis, what is your least favorite track off of Rainbow's Long Live Rock and Roll album? That's like saying, which is my favorite tooth in my mouth? God. I would have to say Sensitive to Light or Rainbow Eyes or LA Connection. You know, they're definitely the three weakest tunes on the album, in my opinion. But they're not weak by any means. These are not weak songs. They're all great. Yeah, I mean, Rainbow Eyes is lovely, but I think that might be it. It's a great song, but yeah, but Sensitive to Light is cool. Kind of like a Rainbow does, like a honky tonk hard rocker type of thing. I don't know. They're both great songs, but I would lean towards one of those. Hard to say. From Kevin, have you considered doing a live stream? That could be interesting. Yeah, I don't leave anything out. I have to see how it works here on YouTube. I've done some live streaming stuff on Facebook, on the Facebook page. So I'm going to look into that. Our old friend Anthony Ferraro, do you have a bucket list band to see live that still tours? You know, I've been lucky to see almost every major band that I ever wanted to see. There's a couple, though, that I haven't, and these are more artists, not bands. Most of the bands I've seen. I have yet to see Elton John, but I've taken care of that. I have tickets to see him in March. I've never seen Billy Joel. Believe it or not, I live in New York. I know, strange. And I've never seen Paul McCartney. I'd like to do that. My other bucket list thing, and I've seen them once before, but I saw them when I really didn't like them. I would like to see the Rolling Stones one more time before they either kick the bucket or call it quits. So, from the Lax, favorite bass tone? I would have to say Geddy Lee, or maybe Jaco Pastorius. I love Geddy Lee's bass tone, really do. Jaco was great too. From J.K. Baca 41, which era of Humble Pie do you prefer, Frampton or Clemson? Man, originally I was thinking Clemson era, but those first handful of Frampton albums are damn good too. I think I like the grittiness of the Clem era better, but I think there was a lot more variety in the music of Humble Pie when Frampton was in the band. I'm going to lean towards Frampton by a nose. It's real close, real close. Last but not least, as we hit the hour mark here, Richard Strickler. I realize that your primary interests are in hard rock, metal, prog, rock, etc., but what are your opinions of artists such as Bruce Springsteen, Tom Petty, Bob Seger, John Mellencamp, or John Fogerty? I'd like to hear a short response to each of, if you feel like it. Yeah, absolutely. So I actually like Bruce Springsteen. I especially like his older stuff from the 70s, but I love The Rising, which was his album from, 2000 or 2001, and I've liked most of the stuff that he's done. I don't have an issue with Bruce. I have always liked Springsteen. Tom Petty, kind of similar. I never really owned any Tom Petty albums until I bought like a fantastic 2 CD definitive collection or something like that a couple of years back, which it's just amazing how many memorable and hit and songs and FM staples Tom Petty had over his career. It's just unbelievable. So I like Tom Petty. Bob Seger, I own his 2 live albums from the 70s, or is it the late 70s, early 80s? I forget when the second one came out. And quite frankly, that's all I ever need to own. Those are fantastic. You know, Bob, that old Bob Seger stuff is awesome. And I think he's doing a retirement tour, if I'm not mistaken. I've never actually seen Bob Seger live. John Mellencamp, I've never been much of a fan of. You know, I like a couple of the hit tunes, but that's about it. John Fogerty, I'm a big CCR fan, and I like Fogerty's solo stuff as well. I think Fogerty is an underrated guitar player and musician, and I think he's just been a integral part of rock and roll history since the late 60s. Love Creedence to death. So yeah, I like that sort of stuff too. So anyway, that's it, guys. Just over the hour mark, so we got a lot to take in here. So we're going to try and make these a little shorter next time. But for the first episode, I wanted to tackle as many questions as you want. So this is how it works. Watch this video. If you have questions that come up, put them in the comments, and then for next week's show, I'll take a selection of the questions and I'll answer them. So visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. Of course, we're here on the mighty YouTube. Stay tuned for more rants and best ofs and what's hot shows, as well as Listening Room. What else do we do? Listening Room. More of these question and answer shows and deep cuts. All right, that's what I was looking for. A lot of stuff coming up. So tune in. We'll see you next time.